The movie begins with an armed gang sitting inside a car parked in front of a bank, preparing themselves to storm the bank and rob it. Meanwhile, a man carrying a bag walks past their car. The driver tells the gang not to move until the man leaves. Suddenly, the man stops and stares at the driver with a strange and frightening look. The driver is confused by his gaze and feels threatened. However, the man eventually walks away. At the same time, the gang prepares their weapons and gets ready to raid the bank. The gang leader tells his men that entering the bank will be very easy and the operation should go smoothly because most of the employees will be leaving and there will only be a few security guards present. This, he explains, will allow them to enter, rob the bank, and leave without hurting anyone. He also instructs them to carry extra magazines and weapons for emergencies. One of the gang members objects, reminding him that he had said there would be no confrontation, but he replies that the extra weapons are only for emergencies. Soon, they notice that the same man has entered the bank. As soon as he walks in, an employee tells him that the bank is closed. The man responds that he wants to make a deposit. However, the receptionist explains that the bank is shutting down permanently and that all customers had already been informed to come and collect their deposits before the closure. The man insists, and the employee asks for his identification card. This is when we learn that the man's name is Reverent. Reverent asks the employee to process his transaction first, but the bank manager steps in and tells him that transactions will be handled in order. Reverent then politely approaches a woman standing in line and asks if he can take her place. She agrees. At this point, we learn that there are 3 customers inside the bank, along with the receptionist and the bank manager. The manager then approaches Reverent to complete his transaction. Meanwhile, the gang finishes preparing, puts on their masks, and readies their weapons. Moments later, they storm the bank and begin threatening everyone inside, warning that anyone who makes a mistake will be killed. However, one of the female customers manages to hide her phone before the robbers notice her. The gang then begins asking the hostages for their phones. One woman tells them that she left hers in the car, while an elderly woman claims that she does not know how to use a phone. One of the gang members informs the leader that there is one person missing from the group inside the bank. They ask the bank manager about the missing individuals, and he explains that they are in the deposit room collecting their money. The scene then shifts to Reverent, who asks the receptionist to leave him alone because one of the bank's rules is that customers should never be left unattended. Suddenly, they hear gunshots, forcing the employee to leave Reverent and his money behind so he can see what is happening in the bank. When he steps outside, he finds that the gang has completely taken control of the bank. At this point, we discover that the gang leader is actually the receptionist's brother. We also learn that the receptionist's name is Danny, while the gang leader's name is Paul. Paul had originally planned to rob the bank on Danny's day off. Surprised to see him there, Paul asks what brought him to work that day. Danny explains that the assistant manager was sick, so he decided to come in and fill the position. When Paul removes his mask, one of the gang members becomes angry and tells him that the security cameras have already recorded his face, making it easier for the police to identify and arrest them all. However, Danny reassures them that it does not matter because the security cameras have been out of service for weeks since the bank is about to close permanently. Upon hearing this, the gang members begin removing their masks one after another. Paul then orders the gang to gather Danny, the bank manager, and the customers into a single room. He also instructs one of the gang members to search for Reverent, the mysterious man they noticed before entering the bank. The woman searches the entire bank but cannot find him. She contacts Paul and tells him that she has looked everywhere, yet there is no sign of Reverent. She assumes that he may have left the building through another exit. Paul tells her to forget about him and focus on opening the bank vault and collecting all the deposits. He explains that they only have 10 minutes left and cannot afford to waste time on anything else. She follows his orders and heads to the vault. Before opening it, she puts on her headphones and starts listening to music. A few minutes later, Paul calls her over the radio to check on her progress, but she cannot hear him because of the music and does not respond. Meanwhile, 2 of the gang members step outside for a cigarette, leaving the hostages unattended for a few moments. Danny takes advantage of the opportunity, grabs the phone that one of the women had hidden, and sends a message to the police explaining what is happening inside the bank. Shortly afterward, the police contact Detective Pascal and instruct her to head to the bank and investigate the situation, as a robbery may be in progress. The scene then shifts to the woman Paul sent to empty the vault. After collecting all the deposits, she calls Paul and tells him that she has taken everything. Just as she's about to leave, she hears a strange noise. Curious, she decides to go back and investigate its source. As she gets closer, She's shocked to discover Reverent hiding inside one of the ventilation shafts. She immediately contacts Paul and informs him that she has found the mysterious man in the air ducts. At the same time, Detective Pascal arrives at the bank accompanied by 2 police officers. The getaway driver quickly alerts the gang to the police presence. Paul immediately warns the rest of the gang. When Detective Pascal approaches the bank, she sees Paul standing outside pretending to be the assistant manager. She tells him that she has received a report about a bank robbery. Paul denies everything and claims that the report is false, explaining that the bank has been permanently closed. Pascal insists on entering the building to verify the situation for herself, but Paul refuses. He tells her that he cannot allow her inside because she does not have an official warrant or authorization to enter the bank. Pascal responds that the police received a message from inside the bank stating that a robbery is taking place and that people are being held hostage. Despite this, Paul continues to refuse entry. As a result, Pascal takes out her phone and photographs him. Back inside the bank, the woman who emptied the vault confronts Reverent. He calmly tells her to hand over the bag he came for and advises her not to interfere if she wants to stay alive. However, she asks what is inside the bag. Reverent replies that its contents are private and that she does not want to see them. When she opens the bag anyway, she is horrified to find human eyes belonging to people who had been murdered by Reverent. In an instant, Reverent attacks her with a knife, striking one of the body's most vital arteries. He then tells her that she will bleed to death within 9 minutes because he severed a major artery. At that moment, we discover that Reverent is the notorious serial killer whom the government had warned the public about at the beginning of the film. Meanwhile, Detective Pascal approaches the getaway driver and tells him that she wants to search the vehicle. The driver responds by asking her why she wants to inspect it. At the same time, the woman whom Reverent stabbed manages to fire several shots at him, but unfortunately none of the bullets hit their target. Detective Pascal hears the gunshots, and the getaway driver immediately tries to flee the scene. Pascal and the police officers chase after him. As soon as the driver pulls out a gun, Pascal shoots him and kills him. A gunfight then breaks out between the police and the gang members. The gang manages to drag the wounded driver back inside the bank in an attempt to save him, but his condition is far too critical, and there is nothing they can do. Paul then tells one of the gang members, named Pix, to activate their backup plan. The plan involves creating a passage that will lead them to the elevator shaft, allowing them to escape through it. Meanwhile, Detective Pascal sends Paul's photograph to the police so they can identify him. She and her team then begin searching the area for any hidden passages or emergency exits. Back inside the bank, Paul finds the woman he had sent to empty the vault and discovers that she has been killed. He informs the rest of the gang that a psychopath is inside the bank and that he is hunting them. Paul warns them that the killer knows exactly how to target the most vulnerable and deadly points of the human body. As Reverent continues moving through the ventilation system, Paul reminds the gang that they only need to hold out long enough for Pix to finish creating the escape route to the elevator. During this time, the elderly woman asks to use the restroom. Lily decides to escort her there. Later, Paul has a conversation with his friend, who asks if Danny is really his brother because the two of them are completely different in every way. Paul replies that every person chooses their own path in life. The story then returns to Lily. When she notices that the elderly woman has been gone for too long, she decides to check on her. As soon as she enters the restroom, she is horrified to find the old woman dead, with her eyes brutally removed. She also notices that the ventilation shaft has been opened. Lily begins searching for Reverent, but the moment she spots him, he attacks her with a knife and kills her. A short time later, another gang member becomes worried about Lily and goes looking for her. When he enters the restroom, he is shocked to find both Lily and the elderly woman dead, their eyes grotesquely removed. He immediately reports the horrifying discovery to Paul. Meanwhile, police reinforcements arrive at the scene and begin monitoring the gang's radio communications. They successfully intercept the signals and learn that there are only 4 gang members remaining inside the bank. After some time, Paul begins to lose hope and decides to step outside to negotiate with Detective Pascal. When he meets her, he presents his demands. His first demand is a medical kit so he can treat his injured friend. His second demand is a school bus that the gang can use to escape. Paul tells Pascal that she must meet these demands if she wants the hostages released safely and without harm. After delivering his conditions, Paul returns to the bank. However, one of the gang members speaks with Danny and tells him, "Your brother told me that you have first aid experience, and we need your help to stop our friend's bleeding." Meanwhile, 2 police officers discover another way into the bank through an exterior window and immediately inform Detective Pascal. Pascal orders them to stay where they are and not make a move. She tells them that if the bank is stormed, she will give them the signal to enter through that window. At the same time, a special team from the Ministry of Defense arrives at the scene to take control of the situation. Their mission is to capture Paul, who is a wanted fugitive. They send one of their officers into the bank disguised as a doctor. In reality, His job is to determine how many gang members are still inside. However, Paul becomes suspicious of him, loses his temper, and takes the supposed doctor hostage. Shortly afterward, Paul enters a room, but suddenly Reverent drops down from a ventilation shaft into the same room where the officer and one of the gang members are located. At that point, the defense team decides to storm the bank, and Detective Pascal joins the operation. At the same time, Pascal orders her officers to enter through the window. Before the assault begins, a sniper is positioned on a nearby rooftop to secure the area and eliminate any gang members he can see. The sniper successfully kills one of the gang members. Reverent immediately takes advantage of the situation, removes the dead man's eyes, and then proceeds to kill the disguised doctor and take his eyes as well. After that, Reverent finds Pix, kills him, and takes his eyes too. The final assault then begins. The defense team storms the bank, shooting anyone who stands in their way. The team leader attempts to convince Paul to surrender, but Paul refuses. However, Detective Pascal is shocked when she discovers that the defense team and its commander are actually criminals themselves. They take the stolen money from Paul and kill him. They then murder the bank manager and the police officers who had entered through the window. The leader of the defense team also kills Detective Pascal. At this point, only Reverent, Danny, and the defense team leader remain alive inside the bank. The defense team leader escapes through the passage that Pix had created. However, he soon encounters Reverent, who attempts to kill him. The leader manages to escape for the moment. Meanwhile, Reverent turns his attention to Danny and tries to kill him. Danny fights back, stabbing Reverent and knocking him to the ground. Danny then goes after the defense team leader, intending to kill him. The leader tries to bribe Danny, saying, "If you let me go, I'll give you half of the money I stole." Danny refuses the offer and kills him. Suddenly, Reverent reappears, having somehow survived. He approaches Danny, kills him, and takes his eyes. Afterward, Reverent systematically removes the eyes of all the dead victims one by one, collects the stolen money, and escapes. In the end, the city and the government launch a massive manhunt for the serial killer who murdered so many people and stole the bank's money, but Reverent disappears without a trace.